언제 짐부터던 힘이 장하고는 무는 짐보는 게다 다그러다간 잔도 심어도 tum바들지 잔라기 좀서
To benefit beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching. Today we will complete our study of the classic of filial piety. Upon completion, our Dharma friends here have been diligent in their daily study and discussion, which has been quite fulfilling. If today's study and discussion session is complete, then this lesson will be perfectly concluded. I believe we began on April 4th this year, and we have used a total of 16 classes. This can also be considered a study of traditional Chinese learning. If we use another term from worldly people, this would be called a traditional studies class. One might dedicate 1 to 2 years specifically for this purpose. Previously, in some schools, students would attend high school while simultaneously pursuing university studies. For this type of university program, during school holidays, they would use 13 days to give them lectures. After completing 2 years in this manner, they would finally receive a diploma. So our study here can also be considered this year's learning in the field of traditional Chinese studies. Previously, we also studied the standards for being a good student and child in similar texts. If in the future there are some relatively short texts like this, texts that are too long might not be feasible, or some brief traditional studies texts where we teach 1 or 2 chapters, if we have the opportunity in the future, we can proceed in this way, because this may provide many convenient methods for propagating the Dharma in our current era. In places like ours, there might not be any particular issues, but for studying or propagating elsewhere, perhaps there would be some benefit. So this year we have already completed everything successfully. Personally, I am very happy about this. If there are such opportunities in the future, you may also recommend them to me. Actually, studying such principles is sometimes necessary for us to learn. Even some knowledge from other religions, though we may not have the lineage transmission, it is still necessary for us to study together. Not studying versus studying is likely to be helpful. I hope that after completing these teachings, you will also propagate them well. In the future, such principles can be taught to everyone before sentient beings with karmic connections. Now let us proceed to the formal teaching. Today is the final chapter of the classic of filial piety, chapter 18 on mourning parents. After both parents have departed and passed away, how should one practice filial piety and handle subsequent matters? How should the funeral arrangements be conducted? This is the main focus. After reading the classic of filial piety, I discovered that especially now in the Han region, the spirit of the classic of filial piety has been transmitted continuously to the present day. Whether in people's current culture or in the lifeblood of their cultural heritage, they should be acting according to the thoughts of someone like Confucius. Therefore, some of today's content may have similarities with Buddhism in some aspects, while in other aspects it may contradict Buddhism. But we will not say whether Confucian thought is correct or incorrect, or whether Buddhist thought is correct or incorrect. This depends on one's personal preferences or one's own approach to choose. Let us now examine what we will discuss today. Chapter 18 primarily concerns what to do after parents have departed, how to conduct the funeral arrangements, and finally how to perform sacrificial ceremonies. After the sacrificial ceremonies for a filial child, one could say that filial duty has been fulfilled completely. Now it states, Confucius said, "When a filial child mourns the loss of parents, they cry without melodious tones, observe rituals without ornamentation, speak without literary flourishes, cannot find comfort in fine clothing and feel no joy upon hearing music, cannot taste sweetness in delicious food. This is the emotion of grief and sorrow." Confucius said at that time that as a filial child, after both parents have departed, what should one do? First, the initial matter is to cry loudly. Cry without melodious tones. The character yai here means to cry, but in the process of crying, it should not be like singing with melodious intonations and trailing sounds. Of course, some people might fear this protocol, making it sound like singing rather than crying, which would not be appropriate. So one should cry, but perhaps the method of crying or the sound of crying should probably be louder than ordinary people. Of course, this might not have been Confucius's intention, but I'm not entirely certain because there is no lineage transmission. If there were a lineage, one could perhaps inquire, but regarding this matter, because literally cry without without yai, means not to cry too sorrowfully but to remain composed. Perhaps this is the meaning, but many commentaries do not interpret it this way, so their interpretation is also like this. There is also rituals without ornamentation. During the ritual processes, one should not wear heavy makeup, and speech without literary flourishes. When speaking, one should be simple and not use flowery language or display various expressions when speaking, like reciting poetry. When parents have already died, how could one have such interests? Regarding one's attire, one should not have elaborate decorations or various ornaments, including earrings and necklaces. According to Tibetan customs, during the entire period of mourning, one would not dress this way. When hearing music, one should also not enjoy it or take pleasure in singing. These are all even more impossible. When consuming food, one should also not crave delicious delicacies. It is not the time to feast joyfully like at a wedding banquet. These 6 aspects are actually the natural expressions of children with conscience who demonstrate filial piety toward their parents, their natural attitudes and behaviors. Among these, we discussed earlier, crying without melodious tones. Many interpret it this way here, perhaps it is so. When crying, according to some customs in the Han region, if one does not cry, it indicates that the child is unfilial. So now, including in some southern regions, I've heard that when some children don't feel like crying, they hire professional teams to perform crying ceremonies for the sake of conducting certain rituals. I'm told they cry very convincingly. They even apply eye drops beforehand so the tears that flow are completely clear and transparent. It's very realistic. There are such practices. Perhaps some places in Tibet also have this. For instance, when someone dies in the family, one must cry loudly. This might be a worldly perspective. Our transcendental perspective might be somewhat different, especially for those with high spiritual realization. Milarepa also said in his songs at that time, he said, "When I am ill, no one inquires. When I die, no one cries. If I can die in this mountain cave, I, this yogi, would be completely satisfied." He said it would be best if no one cried when he died. There should be no crying. I've taught this before. There was a Dakini named Lingza Chokyi, whose Bardo travel account describes when she was dying and had died when her relatives were crying. Those tears seemed to transform into hailstones of pus and blood that fell upon her, causing immeasurable suffering. When she returned from the Bardo, she hoped that when one's relatives and friends or one's parents die, it would be best not to cry but to exercise restraint. Otherwise, such sounds are very harmful to Bardo beings who have just severed their life force. It causes great distress, so at that time, they become both panicked and sorrowful, having to face many, many problems. So some teachings also state this. It seems the Han region also has such teachings. The Forest of Pearls in the Garden of Dharma also states, "For all deaths, weeping is unnecessary. For all deaths, one should not weep." So according to Han Chinese Buddhism, this should probably be the meaning. I recently read a sutra on impermanence spoken by the Buddha. There are several versions of the sutra on impermanence in Tibetan, but I haven't compared them one by one. Actually, there are some in Tibetan as well. This sutra on impermanence also states, "Filial children should cease their grief and no longer cry." As filial children, when they restrain their sorrow, it is best that there is no need to weep or cry sorrowfully. This is also according to that. It seems that Sutra on Impermanence should have been translated very early, but some content within it is quite comprehensible, while some is not particularly clear. It's said that in India it should have been a very popular sutra at that time. It seems to have been translated by Master Yijing, or a Tang dynasty Tripitaka master. It was probably translated by him and was very prevalent in India at that time. It's like our Tibetan Liberation Through Hearing text. Like Liberation Through Hearing, it was extremely, extremely popular. So probably at that time in general India, whether in the royal palace or in other common households, when people died, they would often use this sutra on impermanence for liberation rituals and sutra recitation. There are such accounts. There's another one, I don't know if I've used it before, that the application of mindfulness of the sacred Dharma states that after crying, this is actually not very good for Bardo beings. Upon hearing their sorrowful weeping and crying sounds, Karmic winds blow them to be born in different places. It says that if we hear sounds of sorrowful weeping and crying, as I just explained, for beings driven by karmic winds, they are still blown to different places. So according to the application of mindfulness of the sacred Dharma, it would be best if we see these hearing people cry for them, hearing such crying sounds is not very good for them. Of course, these might be different viewpoints. Perhaps from the perspective of worldly Dharma, to express grief and mourning after parents' departure, one should manifest suffering. But from the perspective of Dharma realization, all phenomena are impermanent. Crying at that time doesn't have much great significance, so not crying is also acceptable. Of course, when I was teaching before, I mainly emphasized not crying or being sorrowful. I spoke more about this aspect, but some Dharma friends might continuously be unable to help themselves, especially when their own parents or relatives die. Their hearts are still extremely sorrowful. This is also understandable. Our perspective as bystanders is completely different from when such suffering actually falls upon oneself. For example, when someone else's parents die, we think, oh, it must be painful, but we don't feel much ourselves. If someone close to us dies, that feeling is very intense. So according to worldly ways, crying a little is also acceptable. According to Buddhist ways, exercising restraint is also acceptable, but it's best not to display smiles in such circumstances. This is very inappropriate. Previously, when His Holiness passed away, when I was teaching Open the Door to Mind training, I was indeed very sorrowful in my heart at that time, but during the teaching I also pretended to be composed. Then I said that although the Guru had already passed away, we should not cry. Everyone should remain composed. Later, many people began to laugh. At that time, I also said I hoped everyone would not do this, because otherwise, especially in Tibet, generally when a guru passes away or when parents or relatives depart, people's expressions, including their dress, attire, and appearance, everyone would look down upon such behavior. This is truly the case. At that time, it's basically the same as what's discussed here. For instance, if someone in a family dies and they apply makeup, dress up, and listen to music, appearing very happy, everyone might not necessarily say something to their face. People nowadays still pretend quite well, but behind their backs there will be much discussion. So this is a very important matter. Also, sometimes when attending certain occasions, such as not particularly pleasant circumstances, you might not necessarily feel particularly sorrowful at that time. But according to this principle, for example, if you attend someone's funeral or visit disaster-stricken areas, or visit families where someone has died, you must exercise control over your expressions at that time. Otherwise, indeed, joking at that time. Previously, when my mother died, I invited some Khenpos to recite sutras. While reciting sutras, some Khenpos during their meals, though normally their joking and laughing would be perfectly natural and expected, when they were laughing there at that time, I felt quite uncomfortable in my heart. Normally, if others were laughing in their homes, there should be nothing wrong with that. But in that kind of setting, the host's mindset is indeed different. So I've heard that some of our prayer assistance groups below also have prayer assistance teams. Some prayer assistance teams, when they arrive there, are very proper and appropriate. Their expressions and all aspects are very good. But some, when they arrive there, chat and laugh. Some even joke around and everyone bursts into laughter. This makes the hosts and family members very unhappy. So I hope that in the future we should discern the appropriate occasions. This is very important. I myself pay particular attention to what kind of occasion I am attending today. If it's a very joyful occasion, then I cannot appear worried and particularly sorrowful when everyone is happy. At least I should pretend to be relatively happy. If I cannot smile, displaying a slight smile is also acceptable. I would do this. If we are attending something relatively serious today, a rather special kind of occasion, then I should also maintain a relatively serious attitude. Otherwise, we will certainly violate social conventions. So in our daily worldly interactions, we encounter various situations, sometimes joyful occasions, sometimes rather sorrowful occasions. For instance, when we go to recite sutras or visit Dharma friends' homes, at such times, at least when the family members and hosts can hear and see us, you should maintain a relatively gentle expression. This is very important. I wanted to share this point with everyone here. Actually, this is indeed the case. Next it states, After 3 days one should eat, teaching the people not to harm the living because of the dead. Grief should not destroy one's nature. This is the governance of the sages. Mourning should not exceed 3 years, showing the people that there is an end. Here it says, didn't we just discuss how after both parents die, one becomes especially sorrowful? Some people who are especially sorrowful might continuously refuse to eat. In such cases, at most, you may not eat for 3 days, but after 3 days you must eat. It seems nowadays there aren't many. Many people feel no pressure when their parents die. Many people seem to grieve more when other family members, including their spouses, die than when their parents pass away. But when parents die, whether people grieve this much is not particularly clear. Whether in the West or the East, you should have observed and heard quite a lot about this. This should be clear in the future. Including what happens around you and among ourselves, I might not have done very well in this regard. Didn't I mention before, when my father had just died, I thought I would have many things to do later, so I said I would eat immediately because I needed to handle matters later. So not only did I not go 3 days without eating, I didn't even go 1 day. I spoke this way at the time, but later many family members opposed me, saying such behavior was unfilial. Many said this. Perhaps it was, but regardless, after parents die, if you still don't eat after 3 days, your body certainly cannot endure it, whether as the Son of Heaven or teaching the people not to harm the living because of the dead. One should teach the people or instruct everyone that they should not use their parents' death to harm their own bodies, because if their death harms us and destroys our bodies, this would violate human nature. This is called not destroying one's nature. Because of their death, allowing the body to suffer destruction would ultimately violate one's basic living and survival. This would certainly be unreasonable. So these principles are the governance of the sages. These are the teachings of the sages. Previous sages all acted this way. After someone dies, you should cry when you need to cry and grieve when you need to grieve, but you cannot refuse to eat or remain continuously in suffering, developing depression and constant sorrow. Some people even want to commit suicide after others die. Such situations are very poor choices. It's unnecessary. When others die, it's impermanence. So in this regard, I think Buddhist principles are indeed very good. When it's convenient in the future, we should teach the sutra on impermanence. I see there are several in the sutras. When it's convenient for me, I'll compare the Tibetan and Chinese versions again. Perhaps I have the lineage transmission for this, so teaching it might be better. Otherwise, like teaching the classic of filial piety this time, not having a lineage transmission is always somewhat habitual. It seems I don't have any lineage transmission in this regard, so I always have this feeling. Now, regarding conducting funeral arrangements, mourning should not exceed 3 years. Your grief and these funeral matters after 3 years have passed, your life should return to normal. Actually, this is basically the same as in Tibet. After our His Holiness passed away, for 3 years we didn't hold any entertainment-related Vajradharma assemblies. Everyone maintained this observance. This can be said to be one method. Actually, Tibet also has this. In Tibet, for instance, when parents die, there are 2 situations. One situation is when parents or any family member dies. When they just die that year, sutras are recited for 49 days. Then the following year before that date, for instance, if they died in July, then before July, 3 days of sutras are recited for them. If all circumstances are favorable, sutras should still be recited in the following 2 years, but reciting every year after that is generally unlikely. So generally speaking, for Tibetan gurus, it might be 2 or 3 years. There are such practices. The Han region might also be like this. In the Analects, wasn't there a disciple of Confucius named Zai Wo who said 3 years of mourning was unnecessary and 1 year would be sufficient? At that time, Confucius was somewhat displeased, and the 2 of them had a period of debate. But later Confucius also meant to say, if you yourself think 1 year is sufficient, then follow your own thinking. Because of this, later it seems both his entire family and his entire career did not prosper. So according to Confucian views, after parents pass away, within 3 years, one should generally have different behaviors in this regard. There should be expressions in this regard. This is also such a teaching. Finally, it's showing the people that there is an end. In the end, this kind of grief and sorrowful expressions and sentiments should still have an ending. They cannot continue forever. Oh, my parents died, my continuously remaining in sorrow is also not acceptable. But in Buddhism, there are indeed some that continue. For instance, Master Tsongkhapa passed away so many years ago, yet every year on the day of his passing, the Gelug school holds Dharma assemblies. There is such a custom. Then there's the omniscient Longchen Rabjam, who should have passed away before Master Tsongkhapa. On the day of his passing, there are actually also some monasteries in Tibet also have this, and in India and Nepal, Tibetan Buddhist monasteries and Nyingma monasteries all hold Nirvana Dharma assemblies. Like our Mifam Rinpoche and His Holiness. His Holiness this year has already, in 2 days it will be the 15th anniversary of his passing. So it has already been more than 3 years. It's been 15 years, but we still do this. The Han region also has this, for instance, when a certain great master simply holds a commemorative assembly, perhaps like this. For instance, when a certain great master passes away on the 100th anniversary or 200th anniversary, there are continuously such observances. Actually, this is also a form of remembrance for gurus or great departed figures, and relying on this brings many, from a transcendental perspective, it also has many merits. I remember previously I translated something written by Taranatha about a master named Rakshita, who was a disciple of Maitripa. He relied upon Maitripa, a very famous great master of India. It seems when Atisha was at Nalanda Monastery, Maitripa was also there at that time. This disciple of Maitripa had relied upon his guru for 12 years. Later, when the guru manifested passing away, he was extremely sorrowful. He continuously prayed in front of his guru's reliquary stupa. For 3 years he spoke to no one. I remember it was like this continuously. Later, at one point, it seems the guru appeared in his pure vision, and all the guru's blessings and wisdom merged into his heart. From that time, he also began speaking and started going to southern India. By then, he had already attained realization. Then he went to southern India to propagate the Dharma. There are such accounts. So generally speaking, as a lineage disciple, holding Nirvana Dharma assemblies for one's lineage guru brings more blessings and more siddhis. Because for that person, in their life, it is a special day that possesses blessings and special auspicious connections. So generally, authentic lineage disciples, even holding Dharma assemblies for just a few days, is very important. At such times, you don't necessarily have to go to the actual location. But actually at that time, for instance, if our guru's passing anniversary is on such and such day, I hope that in various places you would properly place the guru's image on the offering table and arrange some offerings in front, then pray well and practice guru yoga. If there's an opportunity, recite the guru offering and use the king of aspiration prayers for dedication. This is very necessary. On such special days, it will bring to your mind stream special blessings, wisdom, compassion, and strength. I also want to remind everyone about this here. So our Buddhist practices might be somewhat different from some general worldly practices. Worldly-wise, after your parents pass away, perhaps temporarily performing some Buddhist services for them should basically be sufficient. But Buddhism has different viewpoints like this. Everyone should also contemplate this point. It's like this. What should we discuss next? Today's content. What does it say next? Making coffins and outer caskets for them, clothing and covering them to carry them forth, arranging their ritual vessels and mourning for them. Here, after both parents die, what kind of arrangements should be made? One should make coffins for them. Everyone should know this. The outer casing around the coffin is called guo. It seems that previously emperors and such had very expensive ones made. It seems there was something like a box outside the coffin as well. This outer layer is called guo. Previously, there were gold and silver ones and ordinary ones. Previously, some extremely poor people couldn't even afford coffins. Some would sell themselves for their parents' sake. Previously, people seemed to particularly emphasize the quality of coffins. This aspect was still very much emphasized. Wealthy people had various gold, silver, and precious treasures. From historical perspectives, this was also the case. If not like this, at least one must definitely place one. It seems in my hometown, when they were building roads, they also found many stone coffins. The people of that time were also quite tall. They were all made of extremely large stones. When we were young, we also heard about some discoveries, actually at that time in our Tibetan region, but perhaps Tibet also had such coffin customs previously. In a place in our Luhuo, when they were building roads there, while building roads, they discovered some such remains. Then we went to look, and when we looked, the people inside were indeed taller than people today. The entire skeleton was basically intact, along with some earthen jars and teapots. There were also some of those, but nothing else much. They should be from several hundred years ago, or even thousands of years, from very, very deep places, about 5 or 6 meters deep. They were finally excavated. Perhaps there were various kinds of such coffins. After having coffins, clothing and covering, there are different ways to dress them in clothes. There should also be some. Now the Han region is also like this, right? They give them relatively good quality coverings and bedding. Everything is placed. But such practices indeed continue to this day. Now because placing them in coffins, many cities have no way, there's no land, so basically they use cremation. But if it's earth burial, it would be like this. But this principle is somewhat different from some Buddhist teachings. According to Buddhism, the Sutra on Impermanence I quoted earlier, the Sutra on Impermanence states that after a person dies, if they have some wealth and possessions, these can be offered to the three jewels to perform some Buddhist services for them. One should not dress the corpse in fine clothing. When you have time, you should look at the Sutra on Impermanence. The Sutra on Impermanence states, one should not dress the corpse in fine clothes and send it forth. One should not dress the corpse in fine clothing to send it to the charnel ground or burial place. Why is this so? Because there is no benefit. In this way, when a person has already died, having the corpse wear the finest clothes and placing things beside it has no benefit. What is the final reason? Because there is no benefit. So in Buddhism, such practices might also exist in India, but Buddhism in the Sutra on Impermanence specifically states this is without benefit. Don't dress it in clothes and place it in coffins. This is explained quite meticulously in the Sutra on Impermanence. Everyone can also compare these. Next, it discusses arranging ritual vessels, phu and gi. These are like offering plates placed in the memorial hall, some round, some square, like this. Now this, making some offerings of food and many other things for them. This is an expression for them, also placed this way. But actually, such methods are not very reasonable. Why? Because once a person has completely died, actually their soul, according to some scriptural viewpoints, either goes upward or downward or is reborn somewhere else. After 49 days, generally speaking, the time spent still waiting here is almost non-existent. This point seems to also be in the Han region's Forest of Pearls in the Garden of Dharma, which states that if a person dies and it's not a sudden death, then this enters the hungry ghost realm. Hungry ghost realm beings can receive this, but other realms cannot. Other beings, for instance, among the 6 realms, heaven realm, human realm, and hell realm. In hell they experience immeasurable suffering. Whatever you place in those plates is useless. In the heaven realm there are many more delicious things than what you have, except for hungry ghosts. Hungry ghosts still have. So, because each has their own sustaining food, it finally says, because these beings all have their own food, only the hungry ghost realm. So now some traditions of arrangements for the dead are actually like a kind of, how should I put it? I'm determining that he has gone to the hungry ghost realm, so I'm making such offerings for him. Then here it states, beating the chest and stamping the ground, crying and wailing, sorrowfully sending them off. When dying here, pi is written as beating the chest. Some sources say men beat their chests when extremely sorrowful. Then yong means stamping the ground. Women generally stamp the ground when extremely sorrowful, crying like this. Conducting your funeral in this manner, that is to say, sending the corpse to the funeral in this way. Divining the residence and resting place, then peacefully placing them there. Then when should they be sent? This should use some divination, relying on divination signs to select the date, selecting the grave site and cemetery, the place where they will be placed. If there is an appropriate time, appropriate circumstances and place, then you can carry their corpse there. This point seems to be quite emphasized in Tibetan region as well. For instance, when someone's parents die or family members die, they specifically rely on the Kalachakra calendar calculations. I don't know about other places, but in our area, it's all like this. You need to calculate after this person dies when it would be better to remove the corpse. Sometimes, especially when it's very hot in summer, because there continuously aren't any good days, the corpse remains in the home for a very long time. If there's a good time relatively quickly, it's also 3 to 5 days, at least 3 days anyway. Now it seems that after people die immediately, they're sent away even before they've stopped breathing, and by the next day they're gone. They've already vanished into nothingness, turned into flames. Nothing remains. Some behaviors in many cities are truly frightening. We people sitting here don't know when we'll die either. If you're not too willing, please wait a little, 2 or 3 days. Otherwise, sometimes some soul retrievers or some who wander the Bardo realm return after 7 days. So when you return, your body is completely gone. This is very terrifying, right? So everyone, originally you weren't dead. I've seen in the biography of the Seracandro that sometimes she went away and returned after several days. I've seen many soul retrievers who didn't return for 7 days. But now, not to mention 7 days, perhaps they can't even wait 7 hours. Oh, are they dead? The doctor checks. Oh, dead, dead. Then immediately they're sent directly to the crematorium. I see that some practices in cities are truly very frightening, but perhaps there's no choice because some people have taboos. If that corpse is brought to their home, everyone is quite unwilling, especially parents. These situations are sometimes quite pitiable. They spend their whole lives raising their children, then when they no one is willing to bring your corpse to the family doorstep. They can only be handled in the hospital and placed there. Sometimes there, it's equivalent to refrigerator-style storage now. Every hospital has this. Then they're sent directly to the funeral home. When they queue up like this, by the next day, they're gone. People sometimes really disappear very, very quickly. Life is impermanent, right? Actually, it would be best if their funeral procession still had some time for observation. With such time for observation, it can be calculated. For instance, if this person passes away on the 4th and departs on the 6th, 7th, or 8th for descendants and family members, this would all be very auspicious or perhaps very inauspicious. There are such divinations. These divinations are not ordinary fortune-telling. They completely rely on each person's constellation and zodiac sign to calculate. Actually, this has a certain scientific basis. Some in our Tibetan region are also calendar calculations based on some viewpoints from the Han region's I Ching. So in Tibetan Raigan now, it's generally impossible to casually take corpses anywhere for disposal. This doesn't exist. But ancient people wouldn't do this either. However, now we're probably influenced by some Western practices. In the West, there are also 2 schools. One school still greatly emphasizes afterlife matters, while another school, especially the new young people now, basically have no constraints, rules, or rituals. These are almost non-existent. After earth burial there should be ancestral temples. The purpose of these ancestral temples is actually for ghosts to enjoy, because if there are some memorial tablets there with their names and nowadays some photographs, this is actually very good. Ancestral temples or charnel grounds, or I've seen many in the Han region, and I think this is very good because now there are no individual earth burial style graves. Now it seems that governments of various countries don't really permit this because too many people die. In the future there will definitely be especially many dead people. Now it seems in southern China, like in the mountains of Xiamen and Shantou, there are still some graves. These are relatively numerous. When I first went there, I thought there were especially many. At that time I had written in a book about cities of the dead versus cities of the living. Perhaps there are more people in the cities of the dead, but looking at it later, it seems they're all decreasing more and more now, including such graveyards. If they're greatly emphasized, there are also some other countries that place great emphasis on this. Now, as mentioned earlier, after such ancestral temples are built, actually having some memorial tablets for them here during each of our so-called festivals, performing some sacrificial ceremonies and making some offerings for them. They obtain these in the form of ghosts and spirits, but this ghost and spirit form, and actually I've seen quite similar teachings in Buddhism. There's something called the Consecration Sutra. The Consecration Sutra, it might be from Tang Dynasty esoteric Buddhism. Here it discusses how Ananda apparently asked whether beings could receive offerings if there were sacrificial ceremonies with offerings at graveyards. Then the Buddha said there's one possibility for deceased people to receive them, while other possibilities are impossible. What is this one possibility? The karma they created was neither particularly good nor particularly evil. Medium-level people, they might at that time be equivalent to what we call bardo body souls. If it's a bardo body soul like that, it seems they neither succeed in going up nor fall down, not having created such great karma. At this time, in the form of ghosts and spirits, they can then obtain some food. Then if they created very serious negative karma, they fall directly into hell. If they created very good virtuous karma, they go directly to heaven heaven or attain other accomplishments. But the medium-level people mentioned earlier, if they later encounter other things, including some wrong views, they might harm sentient beings. There are such situations. Of course, regarding the time frame, the Consecration Sutra doesn't explain very clearly. It's said that the Consecration Sutra, in some later it includes some content from the Medicine Buddha Sutra as well. But the Consecration Sutra also discusses some phenomena about people after death, including how to perform liberation rituals for them. So this section in Buddhism's Consecration Sutra, when convenient, you can also look through it. Actually, we Buddhists sometimes like to compare viewpoints from various aspects. This is all especially meaningful. Otherwise, we don't even know what's discussed in our own sutras and treatises. This is also not very good. So while I appear on the surface to be teaching traditional Confucian thought, I've simultaneously made some comparisons with certain Buddhist viewpoints. I should have also examined a large amount of reliable teachings from Buddhist sutras and treatises. In this way, we Buddhists should also open up some lines of thinking. Sometimes it might be necessary to understand various aspects. This is necessary. So to completely say this is a traditional view, that might be wrong. Buddhism indeed speaks acceptably about some bardo beings who still remain for many years without finding rebirth. Their created karma is neither particularly good nor particularly evil, like this. Medium-level people might perhaps be what we often call sense-seeking beings. They rely on some burnt incense smoke to achieve satisfaction through this method. There are such beings. If there are such beings, then during Qingming festival you burn some paper money or recite some sutras, placing some offerings there. They can enjoy these together with some hungry ghost realm beings. Otherwise, it seems that in Confucian thought, all these conditions after people die are not clearly stated. There's only a possibility that they transform into hungry ghost forms. When people die, they become ghosts. Fundamentally, it seems like because our behaviors and consciousness are all like this. When people are alive, they are human. After death, they should be treated as ghosts for offerings. Actually, on one hand, this has no logical basis, but on another hand, there's one possibility. Some individual beings who never found rebirth, neither falling down nor ascending, in such situations, they might still be in mental illusory body or bardo body form. Of course, according to Buddhism's basic teachings, such bardo beings also cannot remain for such long periods. Generally, it's 49 days. His Holiness also taught before that some Dakini travel accounts mention some who remained for 3 years. According to the viewpoint of the sutra on the application of mindfulness of the sacred Dharma, there are also indefinite phenomena. This is what filial children should do. After giving parents a funeral, there should be ancestral temples. After having ancestral temples, there should still be sharing with them. Nowadays, some people in monasteries also write down the names of the deceased. Actually, this is also very good for them. For instance, when performing some Buddhist services, the names of previously deceased people should all be, I mentioned before that they should be written down. For instance, paying 5 or 3 yuan to the Sangha to have them perform liberation rituals. We now only pay during Ulambana festival perhaps, but not at other times. Actually, this shouldn't be the case. When going to places with Sangha members, this is also possible. This is necessary. Sometimes these rituals appear to be just rituals, but they might also be. Previously, it seems in Han region traditions, memorial tablets in ancestral temples included father's father, grandfather, grandfather's grandfather, continuously, just like our Dzogchen lineage masters, continuing all the way to oneself. There were such methods, continuously maintained. Now there probably aren't any. Now basically people of the 21st century remember nothing. They only remember today, only remember currency, only remember money. This is also not very good, right? Regarding our traditions and our own. Actually, some ancient practices were very meaningful, but now they basically cannot be preserved. People's thinking has changed, behavior has changed, lifestyle has changed. For many of us who want to restore these, it might be very difficult. Next, it states, in spring and autumn perform sacrificial ceremonies, thinking of them with the passage of time. This spring and autumn refers to the so-called spring and autumn, 1 year. For sacrificial ceremonies within a year, one should think of this on a long-term basis, for instance, remembering them annually. This might primarily be the Qingming festival in the Han region. At that time, everyone still places great emphasis on this, at least annually. If parents die, we should also have this necessity. For instance, 1 year after death, if we cannot hold any major Dharma assemblies, we ourselves can pay some money to the Sangha to recite sutras. If we don't have these conditions, we can recite the King of Aspiration prayers, recite the Medicine Buddha Sutra, the Ksitigarbha Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Avalokiteshvara mantra. This is very necessary. Sometimes when I think of my parents, I immediately take out my mala beads. Om Mani Padme, Om Mani Padme. After reciting it 100 times, it's basically good. I once wrote on Weibo that if you especially miss someone after they die, reciting sutras through Buddhist methods should be very good. But generally, after a guru passes away, when missing the guru, reciting the Avalokiteshvara mantra is somewhat, it doesn't seem very respectful. Only when the guru's wisdom merges as one with one's own mind through prayer, perhaps this is better. If it's for gurus above oneself, at most we can recite dedication prayers for them, recite the Dzogchen aspiration, or even just pray to them. This is acceptable. For parents and others, reciting the Avalokiteshvara mantra to perform liberation rituals and dedications for them is necessary. There's a folk saying that if I often think of a certain deceased person who has passed away, it indicates that in whichever realm they are also missing you. So don't be afraid there are such beliefs. At that time one must recite some mantras for dedication. This is very beneficial for them. Next it discusses, in life, serve with love and respect. In death, with grief and sorrow. The foundation of human life is complete. The meaning of life and death is fulfilled. The filial child's service to parents is finished. When parents are alive, one should serve them, be respectful and show love. Toward parents when they're alive, don't quarrel every day or constantly argue with each other. When parents are alive, some people quarrel with their parents every day while they're alive, then cry after they die. I think when they're alive, everyone should maintain good unity, because parents also won't necessarily live for a very long time. They are also guests. After all, even if parents remain in this world, sometimes children also suddenly depart from this world. So the relationship between them is very delicate. When they're alive, one should try not to have poor relationships. Some people, perhaps due to past karmic forces, have very good relationships with outsiders, but particularly poor relationships with their own parents. There are such cases. Then after death, one should act as discussed earlier, conduct various forms of sorrowful funeral arrangements in these ways. This is the basic duty of every person as a living being. When alive, practice filial piety well. After death, perform liberation rituals well, or handle their funeral arrangements well. The meaning of life and death is fulfilled. Regarding parents, whether in life or death, this is something of great significance, a complete funeral arrangement. One should do such particularly important matters. So what is this? As a filial child serving parents, this becomes very complete. So as a truly filial child, when alive, one respects parents. After death, one should also handle related funeral matters for parents. Otherwise, some people nowadays indeed are not very respectful when their parents are alive, but when they die, they pay great attention, basically only when dividing the family assets. This truly happens. It's quite frightening nowadays. In one place, they said there were 3 sisters who normally didn't care for their parents at all. Later, when their father died, they also didn't care much, but when their mother died, they all came because of what came after the house, many bank cards. They paid great attention to these aspects. Actually, this is a very poor phenomenon. After parents die, one should try as much as possible to perform some virtuous deeds in these regards. In this way, on one hand, traditional culture is also like this, and moreover, in Buddhism, these methods for parents' funeral arrangements should be taken very seriously. I've seen a sutra called the Sutra on King Shuddhodana's Parinirvana. There is such a Buddhist sutra. It's not very long. How does this sutra explain it? The Buddha personally went to participate in his father's funeral arrangements. At that time, it seems King Shuddhodana was in Kapilavastu. When he was approaching Parinirvana, there were 4 people he very much wanted to see. The Buddha, Ananda, Nanda, and Rahula. He very much wanted to see these 4. When he very much wanted to see them, King Shuklapaksha said, "The Buddha is now at Vulture Peak, very far far from here. Those of you who have been to India know that the distance between Kapilavastu and Vulture Peak is still very, very far. At that time, he said this was impossible. But later, the Buddha, relying on his wisdom, discovered this. So he told these three, and these three were also especially happy. Relying on miraculous powers, they came before King Shuddhodana. At this time, when he saw the four he wanted to see arrive, he appeared extremely joyful. Then the Buddha taught Dharma to his father, the king. Afterward, it seems the Buddha placed his hand on his heart, then he himself joined his palms, and King Shuddhodana manifested parinirvana. After manifesting parinirvana, when his remains were later handled at that time, according to Indian customs, just as explained in the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, 4 people carried it like this. At that time, the Buddha also went to participate in carrying King Shuddhodana's coffin. At that time, the Buddha actually manifested this to repay his parents' kindness. At this time, the earth shook and various auspicious signs appeared in the world. At that time, the 4 heavenly kings, because the 4 heavenly kings had received teachings from the Buddha, they came in human form and asked the Buddha not to carry anymore, saying, "We'll carry," and they took over. At this time, the Buddha walked in front carrying an incense burner to lead the way. They went there to perform cremation, and after the cremation, the Buddha also proclaimed the Dharma to the sentient beings present. Actually, this sutra, indeed, some of our monastics think of themselves as something special. I am a monastic. If my parents are lay people, would it be appropriate for me to go? There might be some such thoughts, but actually, truly for the purpose of repaying parents' kindness, everything is acceptable. Here I often have some monastics and lay people who are supposed to be taking exams or during some tense periods, and some say, "My parents might die soon, they want to see me, should I go or not?" I basically agree, except for some people who might have special obstacles that I don't dare agree to. For others, I basically agree because they are one's parents for life. Sometimes this kind of affection is also quite special. Perhaps for individuals, it also leaves a final impression. When my mother was dying, I went to see her beforehand. Later, my health wasn't very good, and I was receiving IV drips at school. Later, my younger brother said, "It might not be good. Can you come up?" So I went up that evening. When I went up that evening, her body was quite weak and didn't look very hopeful. When she saw me come, she asked me to extend my hand. After I extended my hand, she kissed it once, then with what seemed like a slight smile, very happy and relaxed, just like that. Actually, sometimes for me personally, it's also a kind of... This scene has always left a very deep impression. Therefore, each of us, when parents are departing, or for parents no longer in this world, including handling their remains, might also have, as much as possible, if there are opportunities, time, and various favorable conditions, one should go take a look and accompany them, or personally participate in the final funeral arrangements. This is also just a matter of a few days. Some of us who have just become monastics might find our status inconvenient, or perhaps sometimes think, "Oh, I must abandon everything, even abandon my parents, it's fine." Perhaps this is a bit too much. This kind of renunciation exceeds even the Buddhas. Sometimes it might be necessary to conform to worldly ways, especially for Buddhists. Actually, Buddhists should be able to do this. Toward parents and toward pitiable sentient beings in these aspects, they should have more compassion than others. Buddhist thought itself is like this, but sometimes when we practice Buddhist thought, there might be many things that go against the current. In this way, this time can also be considered. I don't know if this is Confucius's teaching, but as a Buddhist, I've also combined Buddhist thought with Confucian thought in this teaching. Perhaps for you all, most of our group here also has faith. With these teachers and everyone else, regardless, I've introduced this in my own way. I hope everyone present here will first attach importance to traditional culture. Actually, ancient peoples thought indeed their wisdom and some of their ideas, while they might appear relatively simple, perhaps some people think it's a kind of superstition or backward thinking, but we dare not say 100% of it is all reasonable and scientific. But there are many principles that later generations find hard to imagine, principles of humanity, principles of religion, and some we haven't discovered ourselves that are also very much needed for our current era. such civilized wisdom is also needed. So making proper choices in these regards is also very important. Now this time we also have many Buddhist and some non-Buddhist teachers and students who love wisdom and traditional culture and education, and some with different identities, including humans and non-humans, then asuras, rakshasas, yakshas, and so forth. I'm also very grateful for your participation. Then many of our volunteer workers also throughout the entire process from beginning to end provided everyone with very good conveniences. I'm especially grateful to you all. Now we can say the classic of filial piety has been completely finished. I hope that in the future, truly toward parents and toward sentient beings, we can practice filial piety. This is the best behavior for us Mahayana Buddhists. All right, this concludes today's teaching.
Kirgana jirano chupai, chupun solen droajo.
Bandangara badna Sodargye. Bandangara badna Sodargye. Bandangara badna Sodargye.